I know Glenn Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, the Republican, right-wing nut job or whatever, he has, started to talk about potentially a ban on abortions there at 15 weeks. The Democrats in the Virginia state legislature are determined to hold that majority there in the state house to try to make sure that Virginians have access to abortion. So I know, Molly, I mean, it's constantly evolving, but at the start of this whole kerfuffle was Samuel Alito, your friend, your boy, your homie. I'm just playing. Don't fight me, Molly. I don't want the smoke. But Samuel Alito, the justice, whose draft decision overturning Roe was leaked, and of course the courts were the court, I should say, the Supreme Court was all in a dither because all of a sudden their addresses got plastered on the internet, and all of a sudden they had angry people out front of their homes doing peaceful but boisterous demonstrations, which of course, according to the constitutions, they are actually allowed to do. But he made recent comments, and it just sounded like, well, I'll let everybody ascertain for themselves exactly what it sounded like. But let's hear the clip from Justice Alito decrying the political tensions and wham.
So one of the most remarkable features about the court in an age of incessant leaks is the confidentiality that long covered its internal deliberations. Unfortunately, that changed this last term with the horrific and completely unprecedented leak of your draft majority opinion in Dobbs. How has the leak affected the court?
It was a grave betrayal of trust by somebody, and it was a shock because nothing like that had happened in the past. So it certainly changed the atmosphere at the court for the remainder of last term. The leak also made those of us who were thought to be in the majority in support of overruling Roe and Casey targets for assassination, because it gave people a rational reason to think they could prevent that from happening by killing one of us. And we know that a man has been charged with attempting to kill Justice Kavanaugh. It's a pending case, so I won't say anything more about that. But that was last term. Now we're in a new term. I think that all of us want to, all of the justices, and I think the people who work in the building, we have a wonderful staff, I'll add that, want things to get back to normal, the way they were before all this last term, before COVID, get back to normal to the greatest degree possible. And that's what we hope will happen. And I think everybody is working on that. During my 16 years on the court, the justices have always gotten along very well on a personal level. I think the public, when they read our opinions, probably misses that. We sometimes, you can see by reading those opinions, we sometimes disagree pretty passionately about the law, and we have not in recent years been all that restrained about the terms in which we express our disagreement. I'm as guilty as others probably on this score, but none of that is personal, and that is something that I wish the public understood.
What is personal is women being denied autonomous rights over their bodies and over their own health care. And Molly, Sam Alito just doesn't understand, why is everybody so mad at Sammy? What did Sammy do? But he said a couple interesting things there. First of all, saying that, you guys might be surprised that all the justices pretty much get along. I'm not surprised at all that the elites get along with each other at all. You all have the same interests by and large. But when he talked about the justices potentially being targets for assassination, we know that in the few ways that Republicans and Democrats bipartisanship can instantly activate itself is on military votes, military spending votes.
They immediately passed a bunch of laws for cops.
Cops, funding the cops, yes, and making sure that even more cops get some money by protecting and adding additional security for not only the Supreme Court justices, but for their families as well. I will play this very quick clip from News Nation several months ago when, again, the House, the Senate, and the president jumped to it when there was some civil disobedience outside of the homes of Supreme Court justices. The rest of the institutional elites rallied together and says, no, we cannot have that. Let's take a look.
Justices have already had 24/7 security to include U.S. Marshals outside their homes. That came in the days after this leak. The bill to extend security to family passed the Senate unanimously last month, but this was held up in the House, where Democrats wanted to include protections for other court employees as well. But with an official decision on the abortion case due any day from the Supreme Court and more protests expected when it happens, pressure was building on the House Democrats to act quickly.
It should not have been this hard or taken this long. Every single person in the Senate voted for it. Republican, Democrat, Independent. And it sat here for a full month.
Assailants like the man arrested recently for allegedly plotting against the life of one of our justices are a threat to our democracy, but with the right security, they can also be stopped before they inflict harm.
And Nicole, we are getting an understanding of how much this extra security will cost. There was a bipartisan Senate bill introduced today to fund these extra security measures. That would cost about $20 million. This bill, though, that passed today, the White House says President Biden supports and is expected to sign it.
And sign it, he did. And it's very funny, Molly, to hear them describe the threat against Justice Kavanaugh's life as Justice Alito said, this man attempted to kill Justice Kavanaugh. Just a quick friendly reminder, this man called the police on himself. He called the police on himself. So I don't think the police needed an additional $20 million in security to protect the justices.
He needed a really nice phone, Cam.
He needed a nice phone to tell on himself. So let's be clear. The cops didn't stop shit. The man called and told on himself. But anyway, Molly, the pearl clutching from the institutions and then specifically from Justice Alito, he don't understand why everybody picking on the Supreme Court.
I could be wrong, but I think that the law that went into the Senate after the leak to protect the justices was literally the first legislative action regarding Dobbs was this cop bill. Like the first thing that like addressed anything that was about to come was this like give the justices more cops bill. So classic Democrats. You know, like a lot of the stuff that like is this like mythical like court thing that the court is, you know, it's built up. It's this non-political entity, and you know we're making decisions based on the law, and we've all gotten along. I mean, first off, that's total bullshit. That's not the history of the Supreme Court. There have been multiple times in which Supreme Courts have been very catty and been very political. At one point, President Taft was on the Supreme Court, so it's not like a non-political entity, like for the eternity of its existence. I mean, that's a ridiculous thing to say, and it's something that they say because it allows them to like keep themselves above the fray and outside of like this, like, you know, the hustle bustle of politics. We aren't actually doing this because we are tied to all these people, even though they have money ties and in fact, like, who knows what's going on with Brett Kavanaugh and what happened to get his seat there. Like, I'm very interested in that. But, you know, they have lots of money ties to the elites, and they're completely tied into the political systems in which it's much more polarized, and they're completely tied into the political animals where they come from, particularly on the more conservative side. But I mean, also the Democrats, if you look at a lot of those, like how those business decisions come down, I mean, Sotomayor tends to be like the only one that like seems to like say anything that's like opposed to those, and not even always her. Another thing I want to address that just really pissed me off about what he said was how this like made them a target of violence. And I wrote an article in 2020 about how anti-abortion protesters in particular get special treatment from the police. There's like a huge amount of like anti-abortion violence that has happened. And like, I pulled it up the article. I wanted to give the number. Okay. So since 1977, there have been 11 murders tied to anti-abortion activists, 26 attempted murders, 42 bombings, 189 arsons, and 11,905 incidents of clinic violence. And that's according to the National Abortion Federation, who has tracked since 1977. And it's probably an undercountment of everything, but maybe murder and bombing and like things that are very, of those things.
That sounds like very systemic, targeted political violence.
Yeah, and it's also very tied into white supremacy. Like a lot of these like groups
No.
have a lot of ties to like white supremacists.
No.
In fact,
I don't believe that.
The first time George Tiller got shot, the person that shot him was a white supremacist. And there's, lots of ties there, but they also get special freaking treatment from the police. I was a legal observer outside what was the only clinic in Kentucky for a while, which means like I watched the bananas atmosphere that happened outside of that. So I can like personally attest to this. Like, it's just, it's just things that I have been involved in protests my whole life and would never get away with the stuff that like anti-abortion protesters are allowed to do to people on their way to the doctor. Like, you're going to the doctor and they're allowed, like right in your face, following you, like, touching you, grabbing you. They've done blockades and the cops will come and just like, oh, can you leave, please? I mean, have you ever seen a blockade done by a leftist organization where the cops are just like, oh, please, will you please leave? Like, and talk to them for hours at some point while people are trying to get in to see the doctor. Like that's, they have targeted schools and all over the country. They have targeted the homes of abortion doctors. And these are private citizens who have like certainly have less political ties than like the Supreme Court members. And like, it's just so hypocritical to be like, oh my gosh, we are the subject of violence now, when violence has been happening from anti-abortion protesters at a huge level and been ignored by police almost across the board for decades. Like cops would come and like, they don't take reports, they don't do anything. And so it's just, the idea that they're in some kind of special concern and that they don't have enough money or security of their own is ridiculous. And honestly, I mean, if you're going to make decisions like this, but I'm not going to say that on live TV, but.
Well, so first of all, people who come to Sam Alito's house or Justice Kavanaugh's house that are protesting peacefully, which many people did, they are upholding, I believe, a Supreme Court ruling that Alito was a decision that he was part of. It's the case pertaining to the Planned Parenthood in the Boston area. I want to say it was Massachusetts, where the anti-abortion protesters were saying that they had the right to block the entrances up to a certain distance in front of Planned Parenthood clinics. It even had the right to protest these workers at their houses. Wasn't this a Supreme Court decision? Isn't this something that the court themselves ruled was legal?
Yes, like there's the FACE Act, which has been ruled constitutional, which develops it protects religious institutions and doctors' offices basically from having like protesters within a certain amount of feet. I don't think religious institutions typically have the ability to use FACE Act violations. It's passed in 1994. It's the last major abortion pill passed by the U.S. Congress is this FACE Act, like a pro-abortion bill passed. And it is rarely to never enforced. There's all kinds of like RICO cases you could basically file based on like FACE Act violations that they do not do. And if you look at like how long the U.S. Senate was in control in Democrats from 1994 to 2022, what is it? At least half the time, like where you have control of the Congress, and a lot of times in the Obama years, you have 8 years like of the presidency, and there's just like this long like history of like nothing being done to protect, like to pass any affirmative abortion laws. And, like nobody's helping anyone here. So to do anything, it's just ridiculous. I feel like I got a little off track there, but I always get mad when I think about the FACE Act, because it's like the last one was when I was 14, like it's like the last protection for like abortion at a national level.